Chapter 1. The Fall of Rome and the Dawn of a New Age. When historians speak of the early Middle Ages, they refer to the period between the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the late 5th century and the emergence of a more structured medieval world around the year 1000. This half-millennium has often been mischaracterized as the Dark Ages, a time of cultural stagnation and decline. Yet, modern scholarship paints a more nuanced picture. Although the institutions of Rome fell apart, new social, political, and religious systems emerged that would form the bedrock of medieval Europe. The Western Roman Empire had long been strained by internal conflict, economic instability, and external pressures from migrating peoples. By 476 CE, the deposition of Romulus Augustulus by the Germanic leader Odoacer symbolized the end of imperial authority in the West. However, this fall was less a cataclysm and more a gradual transformation. In many regions, Roman infrastructure, law, and culture endured, blended with the traditions of the so-called barbarian groups who now ruled. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as Byzantium, remained intact, centered on Constantinople. The Eastern emperors continued to see themselves as Roman, preserving much of the empire's administrative sophistication and cultural legacy. Thus, Europe after Rome was not a wasteland, but a continent in transition. The ancient order dissolved, and in its place new kingdoms, faiths, and ways of life were being constructed. Chapter 2. Kingdoms and Peoples in the Post-Roman World. The vacuum left by Rome in the West was quickly filled by various Germanic and steppe peoples who had migrated into imperial lands during the 4th and 5th centuries. Each brought its own customs, but often adopted elements of Roman governance and Christianity, blending traditions into something distinctly new. The Franks, under the Merovingian dynasty, established one of the most durable kingdoms in Gaul, modern France, and parts of Germany. Their king Clovis, r. 481 to 511, famously converted to Christianity, aligning his dynasty with the Roman Catholic Church. This alliance between Frankish rulers and the papacy would later prove foundational to Western Europe's development. The Visigoths, who had sacked Rome in 410, settled in Spain, ruling there until the early 8th century, when they were swept aside by the armies of Islam. The Ostrogoths established a kingdom in Italy under Theodoric the Great, blending Roman administrative systems with Gothic military leadership, though their power collapsed after Justinian's wars. The Lombards followed them into Italy in the late 6th century, creating another patchwork kingdom that would endure until absorbed by the Franks. Meanwhile, in Britain, the withdrawal of Roman legions led to the arrival of the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who carved out a series of small kingdoms. The Heptarchy, 7 main Anglo-Saxon realms, emerged, each with shifting borders and rulers. Though fragmented, these states laid the groundwork for the eventual Kingdom of England. To the east, Slavic peoples began moving into Central and Eastern Europe, establishing roots in areas that would become Poland, Bohemia, and the Balkans. By the 9th century, some Slavs were organizing into early state formations, such as Great Moravia and Kievan Rus, deeply influenced by contact with Byzantium. These kingdoms were not simple successors to Rome, but dynamic new entities. They blended Roman legacy with local traditions, reshaping Europe politically, linguistically, and culturally. Chapter 3. The Role of the Church and the Rise of Monasticism. If one institution unified Europe in the centuries after Rome's fall, it was the Christian Church. By the 6th century, Christianity had become the dominant faith across much of Western Europe, though its reach was still expanding. The Church provided continuity, literacy, and moral authority in a fragmented world. The papacy in Rome grew in influence, though slowly. Popes such as Gregory the Great, r. 590 to 604, were crucial in defining the Church's role not only as a spiritual authority, but as a political and social leader. Gregory promoted missionary work, sending Augustine of Canterbury to convert the Anglo-Saxons, and emphasized the pastoral duties of bishops in a turbulent world. Perhaps the most transformative development was the rise of monasticism. Inspired by Eastern ascetic traditions, men and women withdrew from the world to dedicate their lives to prayer, labor, and study. Benedict of Nursia, circa 480 to 547, created the Rule of Saint Benedict, which emphasized balance, discipline, and community life. Benedictine monasteries became powerhouses of spiritual devotion, but also centers of learning, agriculture, and manuscript preservation. Without their efforts, much of classical literature and knowledge would have been lost. The Church also played a central role in Christianization. Missionaries converted pagan kings and peoples, the Franks under Clovis, the Anglo-Saxons under Augustine of Canterbury, and later the Germans, Scandinavians, and Slavs. Conversion was often as much a political act as a religious one, linking rulers with the wider Christian world and strengthening ties with Rome or Byzantium. Thus, the Church was both spiritual and temporal, a unifying force in a fragmented landscape, and the custodian of Europe's intellectual heritage. Chapter 4. Byzantium and the Islamic Expansion. While the West struggled with fragmentation, the Byzantine Empire flourished. Centered on Constantinople, Byzantium preserved Roman law, Greek culture, and Christian theology. Under Emperor Justinian, r. 527 to 565, the empire sought to restore Rome's greatness. Justinian codified Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, a monumental legal work that would influence Europe for centuries. His general Belisarius reconquered Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain, though these gains proved difficult to hold. Byzantium was also a cultural beacon, with splendid architecture like the Hagia Sophia and a vibrant intellectual life. It played a key role in shaping Orthodox Christianity, distinct from the Latin West. In the 7th century, however, a new force reshaped the Mediterranean world: Islam. Emerging from the Arabian Peninsula under the Prophet Muhammad, 570 to 632, Islam spread rapidly. Within decades, Arab armies had conquered Syria, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain, dramatically altering the balance of power. The Visigothic kingdom collapsed before them, and the Byzantines lost much of their territory. Yet Byzantium survived, adapting to new realities and developing the theme system of provincial defense. Meanwhile, Islamic civilization flourished, creating a rich intellectual and cultural tradition. Through contact, both hostile and peaceful, Europe absorbed influences in science, mathematics, medicine, and trade. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, was now divided among Latin Christendom, Orthodox Byzantium, and the Islamic world. Chapter 5. The Carolingian Age and the Transformation of Europe. In the West, the most significant political revival came from the Franks under the Carolingian dynasty. Charles Martel, circa 688 to 741, strengthened Frankish power and famously halted Muslim expansion at the Battle of Tours, 732. His grandson, Charlemagne, R. 7682814, forged an empire that stretched from the Pyrenees to Central Europe. Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in 800, symbolically reviving the Western Roman Empire. This act fused Roman, Christian, and Germanic traditions into a new political order. Though his empire fragmented soon after his death, Charlemagne set a precedent for the idea of a united Christendom under imperial rule. The Carolingians also sponsored a cultural revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance. Scholars like Alcuin of York reformed education, promoted Latin literacy, and preserved ancient texts. Carolingian script, a clear and uniform handwriting style, made manuscripts more legible and influenced later European writing. At the same time, social structures shifted toward feudalism. Lords granted land to vassals in exchange for loyalty and military service. This system was not yet fully developed, but the seeds of medieval feudal society were sown in the Carolingian era. Chapter 6. Vikings, Magyars, and the Shaping of Medieval Europe. From the late 8th century, Europe faced waves of new invasions. The most famous were the Vikings, seafaring warriors and traders from Scandinavia. Beginning with the raid on Lindisfarne in 793, Viking attacks terrorized coasts and river valleys. They plundered monasteries, besieged cities, and eventually settled in places like Normandy, Ireland, and Russia. Yet the Vikings were not only raiders, they were also explorers and settlers. They founded Dublin, traded along the rivers of Eastern Europe, and even reached North America around the year 1000. Their integration into European societies, such as the Normans in France, would have lasting effects. Meanwhile, the Magyars, a nomadic people from the Eurasian steppe, raided Central Europe in the 9th and 10th centuries. Their attacks devastated Germany, Italy, and France until their defeat at the Battle of Lechfeld, 955, under Otto I. The Magyars eventually settled in the Carpathian Basin, forming the Kingdom of Hungary. The Saracens, Muslim raiders from North Africa, also attacked southern Europe, especially Italy. The combined pressure of Vikings, Magyars, and Saracens deepened Europe's militarization and encouraged the growth of fortified castles and local lordship, reinforcing the feudal order. Chapter 7. Life, Culture, and Economy in the Early Middle Ages. Despite the turbulence, daily life for most people revolved around the rhythms of agriculture. The vast majority of Europeans were peasants, tied to the land, producing food for their lords and families. Farming methods were basic, though innovations like the heavy plow and the three-field system began to spread in the later centuries. Towns and long-distance trade shrank compared to Roman times, but never disappeared. Local markets thrived, and by the 9th and 10th centuries, trade networks revived, linking Europe with Byzantium and the Islamic world. Goods such as furs, slaves, spices, and silks moved across borders. Culturally, the early Middle Ages produced remarkable art and literature. Illuminated manuscripts such as the Book of Kells demonstrated intricate artistry. Architecture was dominated by churches and monasteries built in the emerging Romanesque style. Epic poetry, such as Beowulf and the Song of Roland, reflected both heroic traditions and Christian themes. Law and governance were often localized, blending Germanic customs with Roman law and Christian ethics. Kings issued codes, but local assemblies and customary law held strong sway. For intellectual life, monasteries and cathedral schools preserved knowledge, though it was limited compared to later centuries. Yet the foundation was laid for the intellectual flowering of the High Middle Ages. Chapter 8. The End of the Early Middle Ages. By the 10th and early 11th centuries, Europe was undergoing profound change. The Carolingian Empire had fragmented, giving rise to powerful regional lords. Feudal relationships and manorial economies solidified, structuring society into lords, vassals, and serfs. The Ottonian dynasty in Germany revived imperial authority, continuing the dream of Charlemagne's empire as the Holy Roman Empire. In France, the Capetian dynasty began its slow consolidation. In England, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms united under a single crown. Meanwhile, Scandinavia and Hungary converted to Christianity, fully joining the European cultural sphere. By the year 1000, the worst of the invasions had subsided. Agriculture and trade were expanding, and population growth resumed. The Church was asserting stronger influence. Reform movements were stirring, and Europe was poised to enter the High Middle Ages, an era of crusades, cathedrals, and cultural flourishing.